The Galactic Council of 11 species had existed for 4,000 years. In that time, they had governed 600 worlds, managed 3 extinction-level threats, codified the laws that held the galaxy together when everything else wanted to tear it apart. In 4,000 years, no delegate had ever made them freeze, until the humans said 3 words. The chamber was built to hold 11 species in 11 tiers of architectural ambition. Light poured down from somewhere beyond the ceiling, changed color depending on where you stood. Where the human delegate stood at floor level, the light was white gold, clinical, unforgiving. Arbiter Primary Chi stood at the highest tier. Veth species, Tyendial, bioluminescent at the joints, 4,000 years of civilizational weight behind every word he spoke. His harmonics carried frequencies that human ears couldn't fully process. The translator rendered them flat, harmonic neutral, formal concern, unresolved. That last one was new. The human stood at the delegate station with a notebook in her hands and a thermos on the desk and nothing else. No retinue, no legal team, no cultural liaison in ceremonial robes. Just her, just the notebook, just the 3 words she was about to say. Kai's harmonics had gone completely silent. Not quiet, silent. A thing that had never happened in a Veth formal session. The sound simply stopped, like the production mechanism had encountered an input it had no process for. The scan delegate's bioluminescence went dark. The 2 Cast 4 representatives turned to each other in a movement so identical it had to be involuntary. The tunnel people sat very still in their stonecloth, with their hands open on their knees. Somewhere in the gallery above, a young man made a sound, suppressed, sharp. The kind of sound that comes when you're trying very hard not to move and your body betrays you anyway. The human held the notebook in both hands. It was small, worn at the edges, filled with handwriting that nobody in the chamber could read from this distance, but that everyone somehow understood carried weight. She had said the 3 words, and the galaxy had stopped. 72 hours earlier, Detroit looked different at 3 in the morning. The skyline still carried the bones of what it had been. Steel City, manufacturing heart of an empire that had collapsed and rebuilt itself 3 times in 200 years. The river was black glass under the November sky. No stars, too much light pollution, too many things between the ground and the dark. Mara Reeves sat at her kitchen table and wrote names. She had been doing this for 6 years, every week. Same time, same ritual. She would open the notebook to the first page and begin. She did not skip names. She did not start in the middle. She always started from the beginning. The notebook was small enough to fit in a jacket pocket. Black cover, no decoration. 2,400 names inside, written in blue ink. Her handwriting, small and even. The kind of precision that comes from writing the same list enough times that your hand remembers the shape of every letter. Name number 1. Dr. Elena Vasquez, botanist, age 29. Mara wrote it, moved to the next line. Name number 2, Thomas Park, environmental engineer, age 43. The coffee in her thermos was still warm. She drank it black, had been drinking it black since she was 16, and her mother told her that sugar was for people who had time to waste. She had carried this specific thermos for 6 years. Gift from her sister, stainless steel, vacuum insulated, kept things warm in cold places. Cassidy had said that when she gave it to her. For when you need something warm in cold places. Mara wrote another name. Name number 847. Cassidy Reeves, botanist, age 24. Her hand did not shake. She had written this name 312 times, once a week for 6 years. The hand didn't shake anymore. Outside the window, Detroit kept existing. The river kept moving. The November cold kept pressing against the glass. None of it stopped because Mara Reeves was writing names at 3 in the morning. The world didn't care about rituals performed in silence in apartments overlooking rivers. The world moved forward, always forward, whether you counted your dead or not. She had reached name number 1,200 when the phone rang. Encrypted line, 4 authentication cycles. The kind of call that took 11 seconds just to establish a connection. She watched the screen, waited for the 4th green lock to appear, picked up. Reeves. Mara. Colonel Silas Monroe. His voice sounded exactly like it always did. Careful, level. the tone of someone who had spent 30 years in military diplomacy and had learned that nothing good ever came from calls at 3 in the morning. The council called a civilizational review. Mara set down her pen. The notebook was still open. Name number 1200 stared up at her. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Closed the notebook. When transport leaves in 6 hours, you're the senior diplomat on the list. Your call. The encryption made Monroe's voice sound slightly hollow, like he was speaking from somewhere far away. He was. Orbital station. 40,000 kilometers up. Close enough to see the curve of the Earth. Far enough that the planet looked small. Mara picked up her thermos. Drank. The coffee was still warm. I'll be on it. Silence. The kind that carried weight. Monroe was good at those. Mara, they've never done this before. Not to a species this young. Not with this kind of... She paused. They're serious. I know. You don't have to go alone. Yes, I do. Another pause. Shorter. Monroe had learned over the past 4 months that Mara Reeves didn't change her mind. Didn't negotiate on certain things. This was one of them. 6 hours. Docking Bay 7. Transit designation Veth 4 Alpha. Understood. The line went dead. 4 locks disappeared in reverse order. The screen went black. Mara looked at the notebook. 2,400 names. She had written 1,200. She looked at the clock. 3:47 a.m. 6 hours meant 9:47. She had time. She opened the notebook to name number 1,201. She kept writing. The ship was built for a species with 4 arms. Mara had jury-rigged the seat with cargo webbing before the transit even cleared Earth's orbital dock. The straps were too wide. The back was too tall. The entire cockpit smelled like something between engine oil and a chemical she had no name for. Something that made the back of her throat feel like it was being politely warned. She tightened the webbing, sat down, opened her thermos. Outside the viewport, the stars moved the way they always did out here. Too many of them. Arrangements that still felt wrong after 6 years of deep space postings. Back home over Lake Michigan, the stars had gaps, comfortable dark between them. Out here, the dark had been crowded out. She drank her coffee. The Veth diplomatic attaché assigned to escort her was standing near the far wall of the transit cabin. Doing that thing, she had noticed it on every Veth she had ever met. They observed humans the way a structural engineer observes a building that should have collapsed 3 times and somehow hasn't. Not with hostility, not with warmth, with a kind of careful professional confusion. His name translated into something she could pronounce as Arbiter Liaison 7. She had been calling him 7 in her head since they boarded. He had not corrected her. She suspected he did not know she was doing it. The transit will reach council space in approximately 14 of your hours. His voice carried those layered harmonics that Veth's speech always carried. The translator rendered it flat. She was glad. You have been provided the formal agenda for the civilizational review session. Have you reviewed it? 3 times. Do you have questions? She looked at the viewport, watched the stars crowd each other. Not yet. He went quiet. That very particular Veth way of quiet that was not actually quiet because even their silence had a low harmonic to it. A hum hearing that she felt more in her back teeth than her ears. She had read the summons document 11 times. She knew what a civilizational review was. The Council of 11 Species had been running them since before humans had figured out that fire could be carried. When a younger species began moving through galactic space in ways the Council found unpredictable, they called a review. It was not a trial. Technically, it had never in 4,000 years of recorded galactic history resulted in the destruction of the reviewed species. It had twice resulted in quarantine. The last species quarantined had been the Drev, 300 years ago. The Drev were now one of humanity's closest allies. That was one of the things on the Council's list of grievances. Mara finished her coffee, screwed the cap back on the thermos with the slow care of someone who had learned not to rush her hands in low-gravity environments. She was the sole human delegate on this transport. No fleet escort. That was protocol for a civilizational review. You arrived as a representative, not a force. You sat in the room, you listened, you responded. She had called Monroe on that secure channel. 4 authentication cycles. Monroe had told her it was her call. She was the senior diplomat. Monroe had said it in the tone of someone who was relieved the decision wasn't his and trying not to show it. Mara had packed one bag. The transit moved through a corridor of space she recognized by the color of light out the viewport. It shifted here, this particular region, from the standard white of deep space to something the Veth called the breath of the outer field, a faint amber wash across everything, made the hull look older than it was. She had passed through this corridor once before, not as a delegate, 6 years ago, as a witness. She did not look at the region of space to the far left of the viewport. She already knew what was there. She had counted it once. Once was enough. 14 hours is a long time to sit with a thermos and the specific quality of silence that comes when you are the only human in a very large and very alien ship. Mara had spent longer in worse places. She pulled the notebook from her bag, began writing names, not preparation materials, names. She wrote them the way other people might count prayers, quietly, without ceremony. She had 2,400 of them. She did not always finish the list in one sitting, but she always started from the beginning. Name number 1, Dr. Elena Vasquez, botanist, age 29. She wrote until her coffee ran out. 7 watched her from across the cabin for a long time. She could feel the harmonic of his observation changing, shifting into something that was not quite curiosity and not quite discomfort. She had cataloged enough Veth reactions to read the shift. He was trying to understand what she was doing. She did not explain it. When the transit came out of its final fold and council space opened up ahead, she capped her pen, closed the notebook, looked out the viewport. The council station was enormous in the way that things built over 4,000 years by 11 different species tend to be enormous. Not uniformly, not elegantly, but in the way of a city that has grown without a plan. Each new piece added by a different set of hands with a different idea of what up means. It sprawled. It reached in directions that felt almost argumentative. In the docking bay, 20 ships from 9 different species sat in their berths. Mara counted them. Old habit. 7 came to stand beside her. Is this your first visit to the central station? No, he waited for more. She picked up her bag, put the thermos in the front pocket, moved toward the docking hatch. I was here for the Aurora inquiry, she said, 6 years ago, as a witness. Behind her, she heard 7's harmonic shift, that deeper dissonance. The sound of a Veth who has just placed a piece of information into a context it does not fit cleanly and is not sure what to do with the remainder. She did not turn around. The hatch opened. The docking bay air came in cold, layered with the atmospheric settings of 9 different species, none of them tuned for humans. She breathed it in anyway. The Council of 11 Species was waiting. Mara Reeves walked in. The chamber had been designed by someone who disliked the concept of a person feeling comfortable. 11 tiers of architectural ambition rose toward a light source she had no name for. Something above and beyond the ceiling that poured down in a color that changed depending on where you stood. From her position on the floor, it was white gold. The scanned delegates from their tier near the back sat in what she guessed was a deep violet. Each species got the light they thrived under. The floor where human delegates stood was lit in standard fluorescent white. She noted this without expression. 11 delegations had arrived with retinues, translators, cultural liaisons, legal teams in robes or carapaces or the architectural exoskeletal armor that the caste species used for formal occasions. The tunnel people of Meridian had sent 3 representatives in matching gray stone cloth. Mara had only seen stone cloth once before, at a funeral. She had arrived with a thermos and a notebook. Her chair at the floor-level delegate station had been adjusted. She saw immediately that someone had tried. The armrests had been moved wider. A human standard atmospheric setting had been programmed into the small panel on the desk. There was a cup holder. Someone had thought about her comfort specifically. She sat down without acknowledging it, opened her notebook to a blank page. Elias Crane, her aide, had arrived separately via civilian transit, was seated in the observer gallery above the main floor. She had looked for him when she entered, found him in the 3rd row, young, 22, from Portland, still carrying that particular expression of someone who has read every book about space and is now discovering that the books left several things out. He saw her look. Nodded once. She nodded back. The session opened with the formal harmonics of convening, a Veth tradition that had been adopted council-wide 3,000 years ago. It lasted 4 minutes. Involved every species present produced their version of a sustained low tone simultaneously. The result was something that started as noise and resolved somewhere in the middle of the second minute into something that was genuinely difficult to hear and not feel in your sternum. Mara sat through it. When it ended, Arbiter Primary Kai rose to speak. She had read his translated name in the briefing documents. In English, the closest approximation was Arbiter First Kale, but everyone called him Kai. Tall, bioluminescent at the joints, moved with the specific unhurried certainty of someone who had never once been late to anything. He looked at her the way you look at a puzzle you've been handed and told is solvable but remained genuinely unsure. The charges will be read. Mara wrote that down, not because she needed to remember it, because writing gave her hands something to do, and hands that were doing something useful did not shake. Kai's harmonics shifted into what her translator flagged as formal neutral. Count 1. The chamber went still. 11 species, 4,000 years of civilizational weight in the room. The light above was white gold where she sat. Elias was very still in the gallery. Mara opened her notebook to a blank page, picked up her pen, and waited. Count 1 landed without ceremony. Unsanctioned species alliances. Kai's voice carried across the chamber with the weight of 4,000 years of protocol. The harmonics layered underneath made the translator work harder than usual. It flagged 3 separate emotional registers: formal concern, institutional disappointment, something that translated roughly as we expected better. Humanity has in the 22 years since formal galactic integration formed 37 distinct alliance agreements with species not recognized by the Council as full members. Mara wrote the number, 37. Her handwriting was small and even. The pen moved across the page with the same precision she used for everything else. No flourish, no hesitation. The Drev, the moth builders of Caste 4, the tunnel people of Meridian. Kai paused, let the names settle. Who are seated in this gallery, and who were not informed that their partnership with humanity would be listed as a violation. Mara's pen stopped. She looked up. The tunnel people sat 3 rows back in the observer gallery, gray stone cloth robes, funeral attire. They had come to a civilizational review dressed for mourning and had not known why until this moment. One of them stood, slowly. The movement carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. Sat back down, hands on knees, open palms, the gesture of someone who wants to speak but knows the rules forbid it. These alliances, Kai continued, were formed outside Council framework, without review. Without the standard integration assessment that Council law requires before species of different developmental tiers enter into binding agreements. He looked at Mara. Humanity has, in effect, been making its own rules about who qualifies as a person worth partnering with. Mara underlined the word. Governance. Not because it surprised her, because it was the word that always showed up when a larger group wanted to explain why a smaller group's choices were wrong. The Council recognizes, Kai said, his harmonics carrying a register her translator flagged as formal neutral, that these alliances were formed in the spirit of cooperation. However, the mechanism by which they were formed undermines the foundational structure of civilizational governance. Elias in the gallery leaned forward. She could see it from the floor without looking directly at him. Good peripheral vision, old habit. Developed in places where looking away from the wrong thing meant not seeing the thing that killed you. Mara's pen moved again. She did not write notes about the charge. She wrote a name. Drev Commander Therok, species liaison, age unknown. Met 2 years ago. The memory came without permission. They always did. 2 years ago, human colony, outer rim, population 800, mining operation, 15 light years from the nearest Council outpost. Far enough that Council protection was theoretical. Close enough that Council taxes were mandatory. Raiders had come. Not Skayan. Smaller operation. Opportunistic. 40 ships. No markings. The kind of fleet that moved through the spaces between Council jurisdiction and made money from things the Council preferred not to see. The colony had 12 armed shuttles, 3 orbital defense platforms, enough to make raiders think twice, not enough to make them leave. The platforms had held for 16 minutes. Mara had been 3 systems away, gotten the distress call, 37 minutes old by the time the message reached her ship. Speed of light didn't care about emergencies. Information moved at the pace it moved. Help arrived when it arrived. She had ordered her escort to jump. 5 ships. Frigate class. Good for showing up. Bad for fighting 40 raiders who had nothing to lose. They had jumped in to find 8 ships already engaged with the raider fleet. Drev warships. Massive. Built like something designed to move through solid matter and not care what it displaced. No elegance, no subtlety. Just mass and momentum and weapons that didn't bother with precision when overwhelming force would do. The Drev had heard the distress call too, had jumped in 4 minutes ahead of the human ships, had engaged immediately. No questions, no negotiation, just the simple calculus of 40 raiders against 800 civilians in the decision that the math needed correction. The battle had lasted 11 minutes. 12 human ships and 8 Drev vessels against 40 raiders who had expected an easy target and found something else instead. Drev tactics were exactly what you would expect from a species that had evolved on a high-gravity world, where nothing moved fast and everything hit hard. They didn't dodge. They took hits, absorbed them, returned fire with weapons that didn't care about shields because they were designed to crack planets. Human tactics were different, faster, more maneuverable. Precision strikes on shield generators, engine clusters, weapons arrays, the kind of fighting that came from a species that had spent 10,000 years hunting things that were bigger and stronger and had learned that survival meant being smarter and faster and willing to do the thing the prey didn't expect. Together, they had been devastating. 31 raider ships destroyed in the first 6 minutes. 9 retreated, jumped out before the human Drev formation could finish the envelopment pattern they had developed without ever discussing it, without planning. Just 2 species who understood the geometry of combat and moved accordingly. Human casualties, 3 ships damaged, 67 dead, 112 wounded. Drev casualties, 1 ship damaged, 12 dead, 34 wounded. Colony casualties, 0. The raiders had never made it past orbit. After Mara had met with the Drev commander, Tharok, 7 feet tall, 6 limbs, 4 of them currently holding weapons because Drev protocol required commanders to stay armed during first contact. The remaining 2 limbs were folded against his torso in what her translator identified as a posture of respect. "We heard the call," Tharok had said. His voice was deep, subsonic elements that her translator struggled with. "We heard you count your dead individually." Mara had not known what to say to that, had not known that anyone was listening. "Each name spoken as if it matters," Tharok continued. "Each loss mourned as a world ending. We have no word for this in our language. We do not grieve this way." She had stood there in the docking bay of a colony that was still burning debris from the raider attack and looked at this massive alien warrior who had jumped into a fight that wasn't his because he had heard humans name their dead. "Would you teach us?" Tharok had asked. The alliance had been formed in that moment. No council approval, no integration assessment, no review period, just 2 species who had fought together and decided that the thing they had done was worth repeating. The council called it a violation. Mara called it the first time someone had shown up. She finished writing the name, looked back up at Kai. His harmonics had shifted, waiting, patient, the kind of patience that came from 4,000 years of knowing that time was on your side. Count 2, warfare conventions. Mara had been expecting this one. The armistice rhythms were woven into every council-recognized military code. They had been codified 2,000 years ago. After a war between the Skayan and the Veth that had lasted 300 years longer than it needed to because neither side had a framework for pausing, the rhythms built in rest cycles, negotiation windows, what the council called civilizational breathing room, periods during a conflict where both sides stood down, restocked, allowed their wounded to be collected. Humanity had been informed of the rhythms at integration. 22 years ago, standard briefing, protocol documentation, cultural liaison training. Humanity had continued fighting through them. The armistice rhythms, Kai explained, allow combatants to signal temporary cessation of hostilities. to create space for negotiation, to prevent conflicts from becoming total. His harmonics carry something her translator flagged as educational patience, the tone of someone explaining a simple concept to someone who should already understand it. Human forces have on 14 documented occasions failed to recognize or respond to armistice signals, including the engagement at Margin 9. He paused. Let it settle. The Veth Field Commander's report described the experience as encountering a force with no concept of enough. Mara wrote the phrase, "no concept of enough," looked at it for a long moment. Elias in the gallery was writing furiously. She could see the movement from her peripheral vision. He was learning something. She hoped it was the right thing. Margin 9, 3 years ago. Territorial dispute, human mining operation, Veth peacekeeping deployment. The kind of situation that arose when two species looked at the same asteroid belt and came to different conclusions about who had gotten there first. The human position. We filed the claim. We built the infrastructure. We've been here for 6 years, the Veth position. The Council recognizes this sector as disputed territory. Cease operations until arbitration is complete. The human response. No, the Veth response. Peacekeeping fleet deployment. 12 ships, cruiser class, not there to fight, there to enforce, to create presence, to remind the humans that Council authority had mass and momentum and the weight of 4,000 years of precedent. The humans had responded with 1 battalion, 43 soldiers, 6 armed transports, 3 orbital defense platforms that had been built in pieces and assembled on site because moving military hardware through Council space required permits that took months to process. The Veth commander had sent the armistice rhythm. Standard protocol, 3-hour negotiation window. Both sides stand down. Diplomats talk. Everyone goes home with their dignity intact. The human battalion commander had received the signal, had looked at it, had concluded it was a tactical maneuver, a way to get human forces to lower their guard while Veth ships repositioned for a strike. The humans had pressed forward. The battle had lasted 11 hours and 47 minutes. No pauses, no negotiation windows, no breathing room, just sustained combat at a tempo that Veth forces had not experienced in 300 years of peacekeeping operations. The Veth fought in shifts, rotated crews, followed the rhythms even when the enemy didn't, because the rhythms were built into their training at a level deeper than conscious thought. The humans fought through every rotation, through every rest cycle, through fatigue and ammunition depletion and the moment where any rational force would have paused to regroup. They didn't pause. They didn't regroup. They fought until the Veth commander withdrew. Not because his forces were defeated, but because he had no framework for an enemy that didn't understand the concept of temporary cessation. Human casualties, 89 killed, 203 wounded. Veth casualties, 12 killed, 34 wounded, and all sustained in the first 3 hours before the Veth commander realized that the humans were not going to stop. The mining operation continued. The Council arbitration was still pending. The human battalion received commendations for holding the position. The Veth commander's report went into Council archives. Combat assessment. Enemy forces demonstrated sustained combat capability beyond predicted endurance thresholds, did not respond to standard de-escalation protocols, fought through negotiation windows, through rest cycles, through the point where continued engagement served no tactical purpose. Conclusion. Human military forces operate as if cessation of hostilities equals defeat, as if the moment you stop fighting is the moment you lose everything. The report included a phrase that had traveled through Council military circles ever since. No concept of enough. Mara set down her pen, looked at Kai. The armistice rhythms, he said, are fundamental to civilized warfare. They separate combat from slaughter. They create the possibility of resolution without total destruction. His harmonics carried something that her translator struggled with, settled on formal disappointment. Humanity's failure to observe these protocols suggests a fundamental incompatibility with Council military framework. She didn't respond. The charges were not questions. They were statements. The response would come later, if at all. Count 3. The harmonics shifted. The translator flagged it immediately. Formal concern, she had never seen that flag before. Psychological contamination. The chamber went very still. Different kind of still than before. The kind that happens when you say something that everyone has been thinking about, but nobody wanted to be the first to name. Human grief practices, Kai said carefully, specifically the tradition of naming each individual casualty building, physical memorials, holding public ceremonies of mourning, have been observed by allied species and have produced what the Council describes as significant and unplanned psychological effects. He paused. The harmonics underneath his words carried layers that the translator couldn't fully render. Something between concern and confusion, and the kind of careful attention you give to something you don't fully understand but know is important. The Drev, he continued, watched humans conduct memorial services for the dead at the Battle of Margin 9. They watched for 3 hours. They returned to their ships. They remained in a state of collective mourning for 21 days. Mara did not move. Drev Command filed a formal report, not a complaint. A report. They wanted the Council to understand what they had seen because they had no framework for it. The Drev representative was in the gallery, massive, six-limbed, war-hardened species that had fought the Skayan Empire to a standstill, in conflicts that had lasted generations, watching Mara with absolute stillness. Multiple eyes that didn't blink the way human eyes blinked, just watched. Every species the Council recognizes, Kai said, grieves collectively, in their own way, but always as a unit. The loss is absorbed into the whole. Humans grieve each individual as if the whole were made of individuals, as if the loss of one were not a reduction of the group, but the elimination of something that could not be replaced by the group's continuation. He looked at Mara. The Drev had no word for this. They watched. They felt something they could not name. They were 3 weeks finding their way back to functional. Elias had leaned forward in the gallery. She could see it without looking, the movement of someone who was starting to understand something that hadn't been in the briefing documents. The tunnel people of Meridian, Kai continued, constructed a permanent memorial to the Aurora colony dead without being requested to do so, without compensation, without any diplomatic communication preceding the act. They simply did it because they had learned what happened and believed the dead should be named in stone. Mara's hand tightened on her pen. Small movement, invisible from the gallery. She loosened it, wrote one word, Aurora. The memorial used 47 different terms from their own language, none of which translated directly, but which a Veth linguist rendered approximately as those who were here and are not and should not be forgotten and will not be. The tunnel people in the gallery had not moved, still sat in their stone cloth, hands open on their knees, the posture of people waiting for something. She didn't know what. The Council's concern, Kai said, is not that the memorial exists. The concern is the effect. Species that had not previously engaged with human grief practices are developing what psychological assessments call empathic destabilization. They are beginning to count their own dead individually. They are asking for names. His harmonics went into that formal concern register again. This Council does not suggest that human grief practices are wrong. It suggests they are destabilizing. And that destabilization of allied species' psychological frameworks constitutes a form of civilizational contamination. The memory came like it always did, without warning, without permission, just there. 6 years ago, Aurora Station, Kepler System, Outer Colonies. Population 2,400, mining and agricultural. Established 11 years prior. Terraforming still in progress. 3 more generations before the planet would be fully habitable. Until then, the station. Orbital platform, hydroponics bays, living quarters, schools, everything humanity needed to build a future in places where the ground wasn't ready yet. Mara had been 32, assigned as civilian infrastructure liaison, not military, not diplomatic, just someone who knew how to make systems work and keep people alive in places where the margin for error was measured in minutes of oxygen and degrees of temperature. Cassidy had been 24, botanist, hydroponics specialist, the kind of person who could make things grow in soil that had never seen earth and atmosphere that was still learning what oxygen meant. They had been in the hydroponics bay when the sensors caught it. Unknown fleet, 47 vessels, Skayan Empire markings, trajectory intercept in 32 minutes, Aurora defenses, 3 orbital platforms, 12 armed shuttles, built for deterrence, for making raiders think twice, not for fighting the Skayan Empire. The ratio was 15.7 to 1. Mara had been in command. Infrastructure liaison meant you were in charge when the actual commanders weren't present. The actual commanders had been 3 systems away. 43 minutes at jump speed. Help was coming. Help was always coming. It was just a question of whether it arrived before or after the thing it was meant to help with. She had ordered evacuation. All civilians to escape pods. All defensive platforms to full alert. All shuttles to combat deployment. It had bought them time. 47 minutes total. From first sensor contact to final platform failure. The Skayan hadn't wanted the station. They had wanted the lesson, the demonstration, the message sent to every human colony that looked at disputed space and decided it was worth the risk. The platforms had fallen in sequence. 1, 2, 3, 14 minutes, 29 minutes, 47 minutes. The shuttles had fought, all 12, against 47 warships, the kind of math that only made sense if you had no other choice. If the alternative was watching from the escape pods while the station burned. They had destroyed 2 Skayan ships, damaged 7 more, bought 3 additional minutes for the evacuation. 11 of the 12 shuttles were gone by minute 50. Mara had been in escape pod 7, with 200 other people, watching through the viewport as the station broke apart. Cassidy had been in pod 12. The Skayan had targeted the pods. Not all of them, just enough. The lesson wasn't complete if everyone survived. Pod 12 had been hit at minute 51. Direct strike. No wreckage. Just the flash. The brief, bright moment where matter became energy and energy scattered into the black. Mara had watched her sister die from 3,000 kilometers away. 2,400 people on Aurora Station. 200 survived in escape pods that the Skayan didn't bother to destroy because the lesson was about what happened when you built homes in places you weren't invited. The human fleet arrived at minute 94. 43 minutes late. Found wreckage. Found survivors. Found the kind of aftermath that left marks deeper than radiation scarring. Mara had been pulled from Pod 7 at minute 97. Alive. Functional. The only senior officer left. The one who had to give the report. Who had to count the bodies. Who had to write the names. All 2,400 of them. She had started with Dr. Elena Vasquez, botanist, age 29, Cassidy's supervisor, found in the hydroponics bay, still at her station, still trying to save the seeds. She had ended with Samuel Torres, colonist, age 67, found in the outer hull breach, died holding a pressure seal closed so 3 people in the compartment behind him could reach their suits. Name number 847, Cassidy Reeves, botanist, age 24, killed in escape pod 12. No remains recovered. The council had held an inquiry. 6 months later, formal investigation into the Aurora incident. Mara had sat where Elias was sitting now, in the observer gallery, had answered questions for 4 hours. In a voice she had kept carefully flat, while a council inquiry team documented what happened in language so clean and clinical, it barely resembled the thing it was describing. The council had filed the incident under routine observation, had noted that Aurora Station was outside council-protected space, that humanity's integration status was provisional, that the council was not obligated to protect species that had not completed the full integration process, had noted in a separate file, classified, that a VETH survey team had mapped Aurora's position 4 years prior, had logged its population, its defensive capacity, its proximity to standard Skayan patrol routes, had filed that survey under routine observation, stamped, dated, archived, had known, the entire time, what was coming, what the math looked like, what happened when you put 2,400 people in the path of something 47 ships strong, had not raised a flag, had watched, had documented, had filed it under observation. Mara had found that file 7 months ago. By accident. Archive searched for something else entirely. Had opened it, had read the date, 4 years before Aurora, had read the survey, population count, defensive assessment, trajectory analysis, had understood fully, completely, what the council had done. Had not destroyed the file, had copied it, had carried it, had waited for the right moment. She looked up at Kai. His harmonics were still in that formal concern register, still waiting for her to respond. She didn't. Not yet. Count four, Kai said. Biological adaptation. The tone shifted. Less concern, more academic curiosity. The kind of voice someone uses when they're observing something interesting and slightly troubling, but not immediately dangerous. 4 generations of spacefaring humans have already produced measurable physiological variation across colonial populations. Nothing dramatic. Slightly increased visual range in low-light environments among Kepler origin families. Marginally denser bone structure among the high-gravity settlements of the outer reaches. Minor shifts in how human bodies process certain atmospheric compounds. He paused. 4 generations. In any other species, 40. The chamber was very quiet. The Veth biologist, whose report we are quoting, used the phrase aggressive cellular responsiveness. The council has flagged it as an anomaly. We are not certain what it means long-term. That uncertainty is its own kind of concern. Mara wrote in her notebook. One line, precise handwriting. We adapt fast when the alternative is extinction. Kai set down the formal documents. Looked at her. The way a person looks at a puzzle they've been handed and told is solvable, but remain genuinely unsure. Does the human delegate wish to respond to any charge before deliberation begins? The chamber was quiet. 11 species, 4,000 years of civilizational weight in the room. The light above was white gold where she sat. Elias was very still in the gallery. She looked at Kai for a long moment, picked up her thermos. No, she said, keep going. A harmonic passed through the room that her translator did not render in words. It rendered it in a note at the bottom of her screen. Tone category unknown. She wrote that down too. The recess was called at the 3rd hour. Mara was shown to a diplomatic holding suite 2 quarters from the main chamber. It was a room built to accommodate any of 11 species, which meant it accommodated none of them well. 11 different atmospheric setting options on the wall panel. She set it to human standard, sat down in a chair that was almost the right height. Opened her bag. Elias arrived 8 minutes later. He came in carrying a small bag from the transit ship's food supply station. Protein packs and electrolyte tablets. Set it on the table with the expression of someone who has decided that doing something practical is better than figuring out what to say. Good call, she said. He sat across from her. She ate the protein pack. It tasted like something between cardboard and a polite apology. The atmospheric setting hummed at human standard. For the first time since boarding the transit ship back home, she could breathe without the back of her throat sending low-level alerts. They read all 4 counts without letting you speak, Elias said. That's how it works. You said no to responding. I did. He looked at the table. 22, smart, graduated top of his cohort from the Diplomatic Corps training program. Assigned to her because his supervisors thought exposure to a senior delegate would accelerate his development. He had been with her for 4 months. He had learned to wait when she was thinking, to not ask questions he already knew part of the answer to. He was learning the 3rd thing now, the harder thing, that sometimes the absence of a reaction is the whole reaction. The contamination charge, he said, they called our grief practices destabilizing. They did. And the Drev, 3 weeks. Yes. He turned his cup of water in both hands, the tell. He did that when he was processing something large, worked it in his hands like prayer beads. Is that a bad thing? That the Drev cried for 3 weeks. She looked at him, thought about how to answer the question without answering more than the question. Elias was smart. He would carry whatever she said, would carry it for a long time. She was careful about what she gave people to carry. No, she said, because they never had a reason to before. Because nobody ever showed them it was allowed. He was quiet for a moment. Then, and the biological adaptation count, 4 generations. She refilled her thermos from the hot water dispenser on the wall. It wasn't quite right for coffee, but it was close enough. They expected 40. Why are we faster? She looked at him. He looked back, young, serious, from Portland, still with that expression of someone who wants to understand things fully, who hasn't yet learned that full understanding is sometimes a door that takes years to open. Because we come from a place where slow meant gone, she said. Our planet tried to remove us about a dozen times. Ice, heat, disease, each other. She screwed the cap on the thermos. We adapted because we had to. You adapt fast when the alternative is not adapting. And now we're doing it in space. We brought the habit with us. Elias turned the water cup again. The warfare violations, he said. I know you explained it in the briefing document. Then you know. I want to hear you say it. She looked at him for a moment. He wasn't being stubborn. He was doing the thing young people do when they want the information to come from a person instead of a document. Because a person carries weight that paper doesn't. We didn't stop fighting, she said, because we learned to fight in conditions where stopping meant losing everything. Our ancestors fought in cold that should have ended them. They fought at night. They fought when they were hurt and when their allies were gone and when the ground was working against them. She drank from the thermos. The armistice rhythm is a rule made by species who learn to fight after they already had enough to eat and a place to sleep. The pause made sense to them. We come from before the pause made sense. Elias sat with Maysat. So every charge, he said slowly, is basically the council saying we do things they don't understand. Every charge is the council saying we do things that make them uncomfortable because we're too fast, too persistent, she paused. Thorough, he said, about the things that matter. She nodded. He looked at the table, turned the cup, then looked up. Are you scared? The question sat in the air between them. Simple, direct. The kind of question only someone who doesn't know better or cares too much to pretend asks out loud. She held the thermos in both hands. It was warm. She had been doing that. Holding warm things since long before she understood why. I survived Aurora, she said. He waited. Scared stopped working on me a long time ago. She said it the way she said most things, flat, level. In the register of someone stating the fact about the weather over Lake Michigan. She didn't say it to be impressive. She didn't say it to end the conversation. She said it because it was true, and because true was the only register she operated in. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression. Not pity, she would have felt pity differently. Something closer to the look people get when they understand a thing they previously only knew. The distinction between knowing and understanding is not small. He looked down at his water cup. Didn't say anything for a while. She let him be quiet, drank her almost coffee, listened to the atmospheric system run at human standard. Felt for the first time in 14 hours that her lungs had the right amount of room. The alliances, he said finally. Count one. They called them unsanctioned. Yes. But the Drev, the tunnel people, the moth builders. Yes. Those are our friends. She looked at him. Yes. The council calls them pre-civilizational, lesser species. The council calls them that. He shook his head, not in anger, in the way of someone reorganizing a room they thought they knew. The tunnel people built a memorial to our dead without being asked, without payment, because they thought it was right. Yes. And that's a violation. She stood up, rolled her shoulders, moved to the window which looked out onto an interior corridor of the station. All those species moving past, all those different ways of walking and flowing and processing existence. The council built their civilization on a ranking system, she said. Some species are ready, some are not. The ones who aren't ready get observed and assessed. Eventually, when they meet the requirements, they get integrated. She watched a Veth official pass in the corridor below. It's a clean system. It makes sense if you believe that readiness is something you can measure from the outside. And we don't believe that. We don't know how to believe that. We come from a planet where the person next to you in a hard moment is your ally regardless of whether they have a space program. You earn alliance by showing up. The tunnel people showed up. Elias was quiet again. So what do we do? She picked up her bag, checked the thermos was properly sealed, straightened her jacket, charcoal gray, human diplomatic standard, no ornament, chosen specifically because it carried none of the ceremonial weight that other species formal wear did. She had decided a long time ago that a human who showed up in borrowed ceremony was a human who had already started losing. "We go back in," she said. She looked at him. "And then I do what I came here to do." He nodded, stood. He was taller than her, young, still carrying the look of someone who wants to understand things fully. She hoped he still had that look in 10 years. She stepped into the corridor. Kai returned to the council floor with the movement of someone who has been in deliberation and has come back carrying a decision. She recognized the shift in his harmonics before he said a word. She had been around enough Veth to know the difference between the sound of someone who is about to ask a question and the sound of someone who is about to deliver an answer. "The council has completed its preliminary review." His voice carried across the chamber with the weight of 4,000 years of institutional certainty, but underneath it, something else. Something her translator was having trouble with. It cycled through 3 flags before settling on unresolved. Before the session proceeds to formal deliberation on terms, the council offers the human delegate an opportunity to address the record. She looked up from her notebook. "That's new. It is a provision added to the Civilizational Review Framework 40 years ago, following a review in which the Council determined after the fact that the assessed species had relevant context that was not entered into the record. It was considered a corrective measure." She set down her pen. "Which species was it?" A pause. The harmonic in the room shifted. Multiple species. Simultaneous. "The Drev." She wrote that down. Not because she needed to remember, because the act of writing gave her a moment to think, to calculate, to understand what was being offered and what it would cost. The Drev representative in the gallery had not moved, still watching with that absolute stillness. Multiple eyes that processed information at wavelengths humans couldn't see. She wondered what she looked like to him, what patterns he could read that she couldn't hide. She stood. The chamber went quiet, not the convening quiet, not the formal silence of protocol, the quiet that happens when everyone understands that the next thing said will matter, will shift the weight of what came before, will leave marks. "Before I respond to the ultimatum," she said, "I want to make sure we understand each other, not diplomatically, actually." Kai's harmonics didn't shift. He was listening. "The Council has existed for 4,000 years, 11 species, civilizational framework that has governed 600 worlds. You've managed interspecies, conflict resource allocation, biological contamination events, and 3 separate extinction-level threats in recorded history. You are by any measure the most successful governing structure in this part of the galaxy." She picked up her notebook, looked at the 4 charges she had written down. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3. Neat column on the first page. "And in 61 years of humanity being part of this community, you have not once asked us where we came from." She set the notebook back down. "Not where in space. Where in the development of a species. What made us? What it man?" The Drev representative was watching with recognition, the kind of attention animals use when they see something they understand at a level deeper than language. "You surveyed us. You measured us. You tracked our adaptation rate and our alliance behavior and our grief practices. You filed it all under routine observation. You watched us break at Aurora. You documented the pieces. You built a case from what you saw without asking what it meant." Kai's harmonics shifted into something that sounded like preparation, the tone of someone who has a prepared answer ready. "The Council's assessment protocols are designed to observe behavior without introducing the potential for coached responses." "I know," she said. "That's a reasonable protocol for studying something you believe cannot understand it's being studied." She looked at him. "We knew. We've known for 20 years that we were being assessed. Our behavioral scientists identified the Council's observation pattern in the 2nd decade of integration." The scan delegate's bioluminescence shifted. Subtle. She noted it. "We didn't tell you we knew. We kept behaving the same way we'd always behaved, because it wasn't a performance. It was just us." She walked around the delegate station, not pacing, just moving. The way you move when sitting still costs more energy than walking. "The alliances, count 1. The Council calls them unsanctioned. I will tell you what they are. They are what happens when a species that learned on its home planet that the person next to you is your ally, regardless of their status, looks around a galaxy and finds other species who have been told they're not ready, not integrated, not developed enough to matter at the table, and decides that framework is wrong. She looked along the 11 tiers. The Drev were quarantined for a generation because the Council assessed their conflict resolution methods as too aggressive. The moth builders of Caste 4 have been in integration review for 90 years because their social structure doesn't translate cleanly into Council legal categories. The tunnel people of Meridian built a monument to our dead because someone told them what happened and they recognized it. She let that word sit. Recognized. Those are not lesser species. Those are species the Council has not found convenient yet. A harmonic rose from the third tier. Veth secondary delegation. Protest register. She waited for it to settle. Count 2, the warfare violations. You want us to adopt the armistice rhythms. I want to ask you something about that. She placed her hand flat on the desk. Tell me the last time a Council species fought for survival. Not territory, not resources, not ideological alignment. Survival, the kind where if you stop, you end. No answer. Because we have records, not old records. We have 3 colony incidents in the last 40 years where human settlements were in genuine survival level threat, and the armistice rhythm signal was sent by opposing forces. And our people did not recognize it as anything other than a tactical maneuver. Because in a survival fight, a pause is a trap. Every instinct we have says so. She withdrew her hand. You want us to overwrite 40,000 years of survival behavior with a 2,000-year rule made by species who have not been in a survival fight in longer than that. I'm telling you what that costs. I'm telling you we're trying. I'm telling you it's not as simple as being told. Kai was still. His harmonics had gone into a register she'd never heard. Her translator gave up, rendered it as no classification available. Count 3, she said. The grief. She stopped. Looked at the Drev representative. He looked back with that complete still attention. You called it contamination. I want to use a different word. She opened the notebook to the page with the names, the first page of them. The first 40, written in her handwriting, small and even. She held it up, not for dramatic effect. The chamber was too wide for most of the Council to read it. But because the act of holding it meant something to her, and she had stopped making apologies for the things that meant something to her a long time ago. She lowered the notebook. The Drev watched us and they cried for 3 weeks. You call that destabilization. I call that the first time someone showed them that each person in the count is a world. And it changed something in them that needed to be changed. She looked at Kai. You want us to stop. I'm here to tell you we're not going to stop. Not because we can't, because it's true, and we don't know how to do things that are not true. The chamber held 11 species. The light above her was white gold. She thought about the Aurora debris field, the transit window she had not looked through, the notebook in her hands, and the 40 names on the first page, and the 2,360 on the pages after. She thought about Kai's prepared answer, used twice now, the framework, the protocol, the legal structure that made everything the Council had done and had not done technically correct. She thought about what it means to be technically correct. She thought about her mother, who had grown up in Detroit in the decade after the steel mills closed, who had fed a family of 4 on a salary that should not have fed 2, who had never once used the word survive as a verb because for her it was not a thing you did. It was simply the shape of a day. She thought about all of it, and then she put it down, not away. Down, like setting a weight on a table rather than continuing to carry it. The weight was still there. It would always be there, but she could choose in this moment what she picked up next. She looked at Kai, looked at 11 tiers of 4,000 years civilization, looked at the Drev representative who was looking at her with that total attention that she had learned to read as something close to hope. The Council has not asked my question yet, she said. Kai's harmonics shifted. Careful, professional, the sound of someone who knows the script but senses it's about to change. You may ask. She set down the notebook. Who authorized the Aurora survey? The silence was immediate, total. The kind of silence that does not arrive gradually but appears all at once like a light being switched off. She continued, the military survey, conducted 4 years before the Skayan fleet came through the outer Aurora system, the survey that mapped the colony's position, its population count, its defensive capacity, its proximity to the route that the Skayan fleet was logged to travel. She paused. The survey that was filed in Vath archive storage, stamped, dated, classified under routine observation. Kai's harmonics had gone very still, not silent yet, but approaching it, the way a sound approaches silence when it's deciding whether to continue or stop. We found it 7 months ago, she said. Our archival team, they were looking for something else. They found a Vath survey document from the standard pre-review period. Routine as noted, logged by a council observation post, reviewed by council administrative staff, filed. She let that sit. 2,400 people. We had been in the colony for 11 years. We had built schools. We had mapped the local geology. We had started figuring out which crops grew in that soil. 2,400 people. And a council survey team mapped their position 4 years before a hostile fleet came through. And nobody raised a flag. The chamber was very still. Elias was frozen in the gallery. She could feel that, could feel the specific quality of stillness that comes from someone trying very hard not to move. Kai's harmonics returned, slowly, into what her translator flagged as formal defensive. The Council is not obligated to protect species that have not completed integration. At the time of the Aurora incident, humanity's integration status was provisional. The colony was outside the protected zone under Council law. I know that, she said. Then you understand the Council was not in violation of any framework. I know that too. She picked up her thermos, held it in both hands. The warmth came through the metal into her palms. Steady, constant, reliable in the way of small things that are entirely in your control. I'm not here to argue legality, she said. The Council acted within its framework. You saw a survey. You knew the fleet trajectory. You knew the colony position. You calculated the probable outcome. You filed it under routine observation. And you waited to see what a young species would do when it broke. The harmonics in the room shifted. Several species, simultaneously. Her translator ran 3 flags at once. She didn't look at the screen. That is not an accurate characterization, Kai said. No, she agreed. It's a simplified one. The full characterization would take longer, and the conclusion would be the same. She set the thermos on the desk. The sound was small, barely audible in the vastness of the chamber, but in the silence it carried. You watched. We broke. And then we didn't break the way you expected. Silence. What did you expect? No one answered. Did you expect us to retreat, to consolidate to the inner colonies, to petition the Council for protection and demonstrate the kind of institutional dependence that would make integration easier to manage? Did you expect us to be persuaded into cooperation by loss? Kai's harmonics were at a register her translator had no word for. What we did, she said, was go back to Aurora. We recovered the site. We documented every casualty. We named them individually on a public record. We built a memorial. We put it in every school. And then we formed alliances with the Drev and the Moth Builders and the Tunnel People, who had all had their own versions of being in the path of something large and being told the framework didn't yet cover them. She closed her notebook. And then the Council called a civilizational review and listed all of it as violations. A long pause, the kind where everyone is thinking the same thing, but nobody wants to say it first. Kai's harmonics shifted into that formal defensive register again. The Council acted within its framework, but the harmonic underneath it had changed, something her translator struggled with for 3 seconds before flagging as unresolved. I know, she said, I'm not disputing that. Then what is the human delegate's position? She looked at him. She looked at the 11 tiers. She looked at the scan delegate in their deep violet light, and the Tunnel People in their stone cloth, and the Drev representative who had been watching her since she entered the room with an expression that on a Drev face she had learned to read as intense, careful attention. She thought about Detroit. She thought about Lake Michigan in January, the way the water looked when it half froze. gray and white, and completely indifferent to everything. She thought about Aurora. She thought about what it means to count things, to name them, to write them down so they cannot be forgotten. She thought about a species that had come from ice and fire and shortage and built itself into something that crossed the stars in jury-rigged ships with thermoses full of coffee and notebooks full of names and had arrived in a room full of civilizations 4,000 years older and had somehow against every expectation not broken. She took a breath, said 3 words, "We forgive you." The freeze was total. It was not a figure of speech. She watched it happen in real time. Kai's harmonics went completely silent. Not the approaching silence from before. Complete silence. A thing she had never seen in a Veth formal session. The production mechanism simply stopped. Like it had encountered an input it had no process for and had decided the only response was no response. The scan delegate's bioluminescence went dark. Not dim. Dark. All of it. Every node. Like someone had cut power to a system that had never been designed to shut down. The 2 CAS4 representatives turned to each other in a movement so identical it had to be involuntary. The kind of synchronized reaction that happens when a species shares neural architecture at a level humans don't. The tunnel people sat very still in their stone cloth, hands open on their knees. The posture of prayer, of witnessing, of being present for something they had no words for but knew mattered. Somewhere above her in the gallery, Elias made a sound. Small, suppressed, the kind that escapes when you're trying very hard to stay quiet and your body won't cooperate. She let the 3 words sit in the room and do what 3 words will do when they are the ones nobody expected. After a moment, she continued, "That's our response to the Aurora survey, to the routine observation filing, to the calculation that was made, and the flag that was not raised, and the 2,400 people who were in the path of something the council knew was coming." She kept her voice level, not cold, level. The distinction was important. We're not going into conflict with the council over it. We're not withdrawing from galactic integration. We're not making demands or filing countercharges or using it as leverage in negotiations. She placed her hands flat on the desk. "We forgive you." Kai's harmonics returned, slowly, in a register she had never heard before. Her translator ran 3 flags and then gave up, rendered the whole thing as no category available. "That is not," he stopped, reorganized, started again. In council diplomatic language, forgiveness is a term used in legal frameworks to indicate the suspension of a grievance in exchange for a specific remedy. What remedy is the human delegate requesting? She looked at him. None. The harmonic in the room changed again. Multiple sources. She was past tracking individual species. "That is not how forgiveness functions," Kai said. "That's how it functions for us. We forgive you because we have chosen to. Not because you asked, not because you offered remedy, not because it's strategic, because we have 2,400 names in a notebook and we've been carrying them for a long time and we're tired of waiting for you to understand what they mean. So we're putting that part down." She looked along the 11 tiers. "Now let me tell you what we're not putting down." She opened her notebook to a new page. "We are not ending the alliances with the Drev or the Moth Builders or the Tunnel People. Those are our allies. They have earned the name and we don't unearn things." She looked at Kai. "If the council wants to call that a violation, it can call it a violation. We are not stopping." A harmonic of protest rose from the 3rd tier. The Veth secondary delegation. She waited for it to settle. It did, faster than she expected. "We are not adopting the armistice rhythms in full, not yet, not as a unilateral requirement. We are prepared to open a working dialogue on how to develop a modified framework that accounts for the genuine biological and historical reasons human military behavior differs from council standard. We are willing to work on it. We are not willing to be told it's simple when it's not simple." She wrote a note in the notebook. The protest harmonic did not return. "And we are not stopping the grief practices. Not ever. Not for any reason, diplomatic or otherwise." She looked at the Drev representative. He was watching her with that total still attention. The Drev cried for 3 weeks, and that wasn't contamination. That was the most significant thing that happened in this chamber's history, and nobody filed it correctly. The Drev representative made a sound, deep, subsonic. Her translator rendered it as affirmation, deep register, the kind of sound that carries meaning at frequencies human ears can't process but human bodies can feel. She looked back at Kai. We forgive you, not for emphasis, not as a rhetorical tool, because it needs to be said twice. Once to be heard and once to be believed. We forgive you because that's what we do with things we cannot undo. We name them. We count them. We build something so they're not forgotten. And then we decide what kind of species we want to be on the other side of them. Kai looked at her for a long time. His harmonics were in a register she had never heard and could not classify and did not need to classify. Some things didn't need a category. The council will need to deliberate, he said. Take your time. This response introduces parameters the framework does not have precedent for. Then build one. You have 4,000 years of precedent. Add to it. She picked up her bag, picked up her thermos, straightened her jacket. We came here as the new species, the young ones, the ones who don't follow the rules and don't schedule their grief and don't stop fighting at the right times and who keep making friends you haven't approved yet. We are all of that. We are also the species that came back to Aurora and counted every piece and named every person and built a memorial and went home and kept going. She moved toward the door. Figure out what to do with all of it together. That's what this council is for. She walked out. The door closed behind her. In the chamber, the silence lasted 11 minutes. She knew because Elias timed it. He told her afterward in the corridor, still with that particular expression on his face, the one she had hoped he would keep, the one that meant he had understood something fully instead of just knowing it. She handed him the thermos. Refill that. There's a hot water station 2 sections back. He looked at her. Something moved through his face that she didn't have a word for and didn't need one. He took the thermos. She leaned against the wall of the corridor and looked at the ceiling, which was a completely unremarkable council station ceiling, paneled in Veth architectural style, functional, slightly too tall. Outside, somewhere past the hull of the station, past the docking bay and the transit corridors and the amber light of the outer field, the debris of Aurora Colony drifted in the dark of that sector. 2,400 pieces. She knew the number the way she knew her own name. She had not looked at it through the transit window. She had already said what she came to say. The tunnel people had built a monument in 47 words that meant in rough translation those who were here and are not and should not be forgotten and will not be. She thought that was about right. Elias came back with the thermos, warm again, the cap sealed. He handed it over, stood beside her in the corridor, and they both looked at the unremarkable ceiling. They're going to deliberate for a long time, he said. Yes. What do you think they'll decide? She took a drink of hot water that was almost coffee. I think they'll build a new category. I think it will take them a while, and it will be imperfect, and some of the 11 species will resist it, and some won't. Eventually, it will be filed under something that doesn't fully capture what happened in there today. And the alliances will stand, and the grief practices will stand. He was quiet for a moment. And us. She looked at him. Young, from Portland, carrying the look she hoped he kept. We'll stand, she said. She started walking toward the docking bay. He fell into step beside her. The station moved around them. 11 species going about the business of 4,000 years of civilization. She counted exits out of habit. 3 in this corridor, 1 ahead, 2 branching left. She walked through the middle of it with her thermos and her notebook and her one button and her flat-level voice and her 2,400 names in the 3 words she had put down in the middle of that chamber like a foundation stone. Not forgetting, not forgiving the forgetting, not releasing the council from a weight they should carry, just choosing, clearly, with full knowledge of the postulate, to be on the other side of it. That was the thing none of their surveys had measured. That was the thing 4,000 years of civilizational framework had no category for. Not that humans were strong, that humans chose every time, in the cold, in the dark, in the debris fields, in the treaty rooms, in the jury-rigged seats of ships built for 4-armed species, in the notebooks full of names and the thermoses full of something almost but not quite coffee, in all the small and enormous things that made up the shape of a species that had come from a hostile planet and decided against every reasonable expectation to keep showing up. They chose. The docking bay opened ahead. 6 months later, it opened again. Mara Reeves stepped through the same corridor, the same bag over her shoulder, the same thermos in the front pocket, the same notebook that now had 2,740 names instead of 2,400. Elias walked beside her, not behind, beside. The difference mattered. He carried himself differently now. Still young, still from Portland, but the expression had changed. The look of someone who had read all the books and then lived through the thing the books couldn't capture. He had kept it, the look she had hoped he would keep, the want to understand. But now it was paired with something harder. The understanding that some things cost more than you expect and you pay anyway because the alternative is not paying and becoming something else. The council chamber was smaller this time. A different room, built for negotiations, not judgments. 11 species, smaller delegations. The kind of meeting that happened after the big thing was decided, and what remained was working out how to live with the decision. Arbiter Primary Kai was already seated. His harmonics were different, quieter, the kind of quiet that came from 6 months of deliberation and the understanding that some of what you thought you knew needed revision. Mara sat. Elias took the chair beside her. She opened the notebook. Blank page, ready. The council has voted, Kai said. His harmonics carried what her translator flagged as formal resolution. Not quite relief, not quite satisfaction. Something closer to the sound of a lock clicking into place after years of being slightly misaligned. Recognition of human alliance agreements with non-council species. Passed. 9 votes in favor, 2 opposed. He paused. Let it settle. Grant a full sovereignty status to humanity within council framework. Passed. 11 votes in favor, 0 opposed. Mara wrote it down, not because she needed to remember, because some things deserve to be written in the same notebook that held 2,740 names. The council offers formal acknowledgement. Kai continued, and his harmonics shifted into something her translator struggled with before settling on institutional contrition of failures in protocol regarding the Aurora incident. A memorial resolution has been drafted. It will be designated the Aurora Accords, named for those who were lost and for what humanity chose to do after. The Drev representative entered through the side door. Commander Therok, 7 feet of scarred chitin and muscle memory from 100 battles. He carried something wrapped in cloth, gray, stone cloth, the kind the tunnel people used. He set it on the table before Mara, unwrapped it slowly, with the care of someone handling something that mattered more than weapons. A stone, carved, black basalt from the Drev homeworld, the kind of stone that took atmosphere and pressure and time measured in epochs to form. Words covered every surface, not human words, not Veth, Drev script, tunnel people script, moth builder geometric patterns, cast 4 color shift notation, 11 different writing systems representing 11 different ways of saying the same thing. She could read the human translation carved along the base. 2,740 names, 2,200 who had died at Aurora Station, 540 who had died in the 6 years since. In conflicts, in accidents, in the simple mathematics of living in places where the margin for error was measured in seconds. All of them, named, counted, remembered. We learned, Therok said. His voice was deep, subsonic. The translator rendered it flat, but she could feel the harmonic underneath. From watching you count your dead as if each one was a world. We learned that grief is not weakness, that naming loss is not the same as being consumed by it, that remembering is how you choose what to carry forward. He placed one massive hand on the stone. This is for Aurora, for the 2,400, and for the 340 who have died since, fighting beside us, building beside us, teaching us that alliance is not a contract. It is choosing to stand with someone when standing costs something. Mara looked at the stone, at 2,740 names carved by hands that had learned from watching humans that each name mattered. That had taken that lesson and made it theirs. That had changed because someone had shown them what grief looked like when you refused to let it be collective and abstract and safe. She thought about Cassidy, name 847, botanist, age 24, who had given her a thermos for cold places and who had died in a flash of light 3,000 kilometers away while Mara watched and could do nothing. She thought about all of them, all 2,740, the worlds that had ended, the names she wrote every week. The weight she carried not because she had to, but because she had chosen to. Because forgetting was the second loss, and the second loss was the one she could prevent. Thank you, she said. Throck's harmonics shifted. The translator flagged it as acknowledgement, deep respect. The Drev petitioned for formal inclusion in the Aurora Accords, he said, as witnesses, as allies. As species who learn from humans that strength includes choosing mercy when you have the power to choose otherwise. Kai looked at Mara. She picked up her pen, wrote one line in the notebook. We choose to remember. We choose to forgive. We choose to stand when the human delegation accepts, she said. The memorial was placed in the central chamber, where every delegation would see it, where 2,740 names in 11 different scripts would be part of the permanent record, where 4,000 years of civilization would have to make space for the idea that counting individual losses mattered more than maintaining collective comfort. Mara stood before it, Elias beside her. They had been standing there for 11 minutes, the same length of time it had taken for 2,400 people to die. The same measurement that meant something different when you understood what fit inside it. They built a new category, Elias said quietly. They did, for what we are, what we do. Yes, what did they call it? She looked at the stone, at her sister's name carved there in human script and repeated in 10 other forms, at all the names, all the worlds that had ended and been counted and been remembered. They didn't, she said. They left it blank, said humanity would define it over time, by what we chose, by how we stood. Elias was quiet for a moment, then, we'll stand. She looked at him. 22, from Portland, carrying the look she had hoped he would keep and the weight she had known he would have to carry. We will, she said. She picked up her thermos. Warm, always warm when she needed it to be. Gift from a sister who understood that some people needed small, reliable things to hold on to in places that offered nothing else. They walked out. The galaxy moved around them, 11 species going about their existence, learning slowly that the framework they had built over 4,000 years had room for revision, that mercy could be chosen, that forgiveness could be given without being asked for, that the human in the corridor with the notebook and the thermos and the 2,740 names had taught them something they had not known they needed to learn. That counting mattered, that names mattered, that choosing to remember while still moving forward was not a contradiction. It was the whole point. Mara Reeves walked toward the docking bay with her notebook and her thermos and her flat-level voice and the 3 words she had said that had stopped a galaxy and started something new. We forgive you. And then the choosing what came after. That was the part the Council was still learning. That was the part humanity had always known. That was the part that would define what happened next. She stepped through the docking hatch. Behind her, the memorial stood. 2,740 names. Named, counted, remembered, and never forgotten.